Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Loan Officer Life podcast. Today, we got a very special guest. Many of you watching this probably already know her, but Kristin Messerli, she's the Director of FirstHome IQ, an organization that I really love. We at Spinlocker are partners with, and actually, at a personal level, I'm using some of that material in some other youth classes. So, Kristin, welcome. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Good to be here.
So I know a lot of our audience will probably already know who First Time Q is. You guys have done an awesome job just getting it out there and love your mission. But for those who don't know, tell us who First Time Q is.
Yeah, so we have, I mean, our whole mission is around bringing homebuyer education to the next generation. And so we do that through equipping loan officers and housing professionals with the education, the research, and strategy to support bringing that education, whether it be to first-time homebuyers or to schools or people before they're even ready to buy a home.
Awesome. So, um, what are some of the big barriers that you see from some of these younger folks? I mean, obviously, like when we're talking like, old high school age, probably not gonna be buying a house, but even thinking about that, like that is pretty much, I guess you could say premature, but just like not too young to buy a house, but where you see barriers?
Yeah, so I think, so I've been doing this research with Millennials and Gen Z over the last 6 years, surveyed over 9,000 Millennials and Gen Z, and we just released our 2026 annual report. And one of the things that we really focused on in this report was looking at what does the American dream mean to you? Like, what is that? And how does it connect to home ownership? And what I think is interesting is that the vast majority really want to buy a home, but I think some of the barriers are a lot of the barriers are really there's some related to education and information, but a lot of it is around psychology and like what they think they need to be able to buy a home. So we've talked a lot about the minimum down payment required, and that question is consistently answered incorrectly on every one of our quizzes and our research studies. And so people think you need 20% down. They think that you need perfect credit. They think you need, all these things like a W-2. You can't do gig work and buy a home. And a lot of that on its own just, prevents people from actually buying or getting ready to buy because they think this is totally out of reach. And then also, I think this mentality around that home ownership is no longer a good investment because so many people, especially younger, but even when they are in the process of buying a home, they think that they missed the boat. So that's another big myth is like it was so much easier for our parents. It was, even a few years ago, it was a lot easier. And now one of the stats that we saw was just that in the last few years, the thought that homeownership is a good investment dropped by nearly half. And so it's just, there's like they're wanting to buy a home because of stability and security, but not necessarily around investment. And a lot of times they think it's just totally out of reach. So there's a lot there that I think can be disrupted just through helping people understand at an earlier age, like this is a pathway for you that is accessible and it can be really, financially beneficial. And people just don't know that.
Yeah. And it's funny, when your first home IQ reports, anytime they come out, I'm like reading it day one. And I remember that stat. It was what is it, 8 in 10 next gen homebuyers say it's essential to making or for homeownership is essential. But the percentage said it was a good investment dropped from 88% in 2021 to 41%. I mean, that's nuts.
Yeah,
And
nuts.
so you think a lot of that's just interest rate driven? Like, okay, interest rates are so high, we don't have this good deal anymore. Is there more to it?
Yeah, I do think that that is a lot of it, and especially how much that like how that's talked about in the media and on TikTok and all these places because people are hearing others just say over and over in even the joke meme kind of content that's just like, yeah, homeownership is out of reach. And so even if they don't even really know why, it is in the ether, like that
Yeah.
this is not accessible. And I think they're not seeing enough content of people like me doing it, like the people like me, like we need to see a lot of different representatives of the next generation going through the process of buying a home, not just the highly paid influencer that bought a home because they had a ton of money, So I think that's a lot of it too, is that they're just not seeing themselves reflected in that audience that they're watching online.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, education is important. I mean, that's a big fundamental thing of what First Home IQ is trying to do is educate so people have the tools, whether they want to buy a house or not, that's up to them, but making sure they have the proper tools and proper education to feel confident in whatever decision they're making.
Yeah, confidence is a really big theme that has come up in all of our reports, is just people don't feel confident in their own knowledge. So they know they don't have that knowledge. Then they can guess at some of these answers and they know they're getting them wrong. But then what was interesting in this report was that we looked at not just, the barriers or what they thought about homeownership, but we also looked at their relationship with the information. So we saw that they don't have the confidence in their own knowledge. They go online, they look for information, but then they get overwhelmed and they shut down. So the amount of overwhelm that people have when it comes to home buying information and financial education is pretty significant, even when they're using AI and they go to ChatGPT and actually 61% said they trusted humans as much or more to give them home buying information. So it is a
That's
place they
nuts.
go to. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's like throwaway. We should come back to that. But but then they get all that information and they're like, this is too much. I don't know what to believe. I don't know how to process this. And they decide they're going to hold off on talking to somebody.
Yeah, and leading into that, like I know trust, you mentioned trust. I know trust is a big component of what you guys looked at. With FinLocker, a lot of our product evolution has gone out of consumer testing. We've done hundreds and hundreds of consumer testing in that Gen Z millennial group. And I think it relates to trust, but one of the biggest things that we heard, one of the biggest common themes was the fear of getting judged. So I'm gonna do all this work, hand over my information, and I'm gonna get judged. But it goes into trust too, because am I gonna hand over this information to someone I don't trust? And so it's wild. Like, what's your thoughts on, like, because I also think about ChatGPT. Like, okay, people are
Yeah.
trusting ChatGPT, which is a new technology, and we're still it's evolving every day more than a mortgage professional. Do you have the why behind that?
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, I'm like very hung up on this not being judged. I think that's so important, and I wish we'd asked that exact question, but it makes sense. Like people and the people I've talked to also in the interviews they always talk about feeling nervous that they are not going to have it together enough when they go to a professional, that they're going to be laughed at. I mean, people have like really pretty extreme and kind of irrational fears around having these conversations, but it's to your point because they don't trust them to begin with. But money in general is such a taboo subject. It's something that is so intimate. And so having a conversation about anything money related, especially the biggest financial decision of your life, is extreme. Like you got to have so much vulnerability to go into that. And so I think there's so many people that are not entering the market, not necessarily because of that they don't qualify, but it's because they just are not ready to be that vulnerable with someone, and they don't feel that they have that trust. But one of the stats that what we found, because I've been tracking this trust over since 2021, and that there's really, really low trust in this industry. And this year we dove into like, what does that mean? And it really came down to this feeling of being taken advantage of, that only 1 in 8 said that they trusted that a loan officer would not take advantage of them. And but to your point, I think it goes hand in hand with the feeling of being judged. So again, if they don't have the knowledge themselves, and then they're going online, they're getting overwhelmed, they're not gonna reach out to somebody. There's a huge pool of people that could buy, I think, today, if they had one of those areas, turned down just a little bit. But I think AI specifically is interesting because in some ways it can reduce overwhelm. But in other ways, it's a whole nother level of access to information that it kind of now it true like the loan officer is no longer holding all the information. They can't rely just on expertise alone, and the consumer knows that. They go to AI to be empowered, but instead a lot of times they feel overwhelmed, and then it's like this, they're in this limbo. But I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, that's really where a lot of our product is trying, the FinLocker product is trying to attack, and we use a lot of your education too in conjunction with it, but it's trying to make it concise and easily digestible and in bite-sized pieces at their own pace. And what that does is it builds trust. And so we actually just did some data analysis on consumers that have registered on our platform the last 2 years. And I'll share this with you because I think it could help bolster some of the reports. I mean, obviously it's just our data, but you're talking
Mhm.
thousands and thousands of consumers. And what we found is it really goes to engagement. The more engaged someone is in working on their situation, the higher likelihood they are to convert. So we look at the people who enrolled in credit and across the last 2 years and did not have a mortgage and got a mortgage or first mortgage or got a new mortgage within that after registering for our product. What we found is 13.3% across the board. This is just the number was got a mortgage. But if you look at people who ran our readiness assessment, which is like if you think about a chat GPT, what answers they're trying to get, but in a more gamified way, that if they ran it more than 6 times in their journey, they were 4 times more. They converted four times more on average, and it goes so on and so on. Like the people that are reading the education, it was 3 times more. It was so you get these things where people are doing it, and I just look at like with your guys' information that you have is so good. A loan officer can start really building that longer term pipeline and getting those people ready that you have a strong feeling, and I do too, that a lot of these people are ready. They just don't know it.
Yeah, which is exactly why we've partnered with you guys, and I think it's so important to help people. You're nurturing people along the way and meeting people where they are, rather than, yeah, people don't want to feel pushed into anything, and they want to feel like they have some autonomy over their journey. And so, if you can come alongside them, it builds trust, it builds that sense of empowerment. And one thing that I talk a lot about on in workshops about trust with loan officers is how to create quick and easy wins, because it unlocks that freeze that you have going in your brain when you're stressed out. That's one thing that I was thinking about as you're talking about the data, is just which I would love to look more at. But it's I think people need those quick wins too, and like little steps they can take to be able to feel confident enough to be able to then eventually have a conversation or take that next step.
Yeah, I rewind to a few weeks ago. You had Ryan Grant on your program, and I love Ryan. He's so good at the way he presents things. But it's really starting about what are your goals. Let's not talk rates. Let's not talk income. And you hear about all these loan officers and you see it firsthand, like, hey, they did a really good job with this client and they closed. Now they're going to have a client for life. Great. But if you can use that same kind of thing further up funnel, build that trust, educate them. You may not get that deal, but you're going to get more people being sent to you because this is a person that will help you. They're not just looking to take your money and run. They spent some time with me and I didn't even do a deal, but here, go talk to them. I just strongly believe that there's so much untapped potential in that area.
Yeah, exactly. There really is. And if you look at the people that are, that go back to the overqualification myth, a lot of people do think that you need a lot more to be able to be ready to buy. And so if you can provide those little bits of information that are helping guide people through the milestones, not pushing them to the end goal of home ownership, but just allowing them to understand what, that is an option and what it takes to get there, and you pair that with empowering tools and this feeling of like I'm in control here, and I can work with a trusted professional who does invest in education first tools, like all of that paired together just as a recipe for someone, for not only better conversions but also just like better community and impact and all of that.
Yeah, well, I think we all collectively can just keep going in everything we're talking about, the theme of what we're talking about to change some of these perceptions that your first home IQ report is bubbling up, and that's the lack of trust. If we start shifting our mindset to giving first before just asking for the check, And it goes all the way. It goes in tech providers, it goes for, for what you guys are doing, it goes for loan officers, lenders, all of that. If you can start with let's give, and then something will come back to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's more important now than ever in terms of how you build trust and show up in like showing up in your community. I mean, even we're going to DC for the National Advocacy Conference with the NBA and bringing 60 plus loan officers there because we feel that the more that you show up, not only does it make a difference on the Hill, but it also you're showing up for your market and showing your market that you're showing up. And whether it's investing in advocacy or it's investing in education, you showing your market that this is something you care about, that it's not just about getting the next deal. That I think really outshines everybody else in your market. You become the person that they're like, I can trust this person to have a conversation with about my, about money, about my family's money, all of that.
So when is that the trip again for the advocacy?
That is April 14th and 15th.
All right.
And so yeah, firsthomiq.com/MBA advocacy, you can learn more about that. But also we'll be doing additional advocacy work all year long. So even if you can't go to that, sign up and we'll keep everybody informed.
Yeah, I think that's so important what you just said, though, is for your market, for your community of representing, because I think it also can be looked at as, okay, we're going to go, we want to change the rules for us, make it better for the consumers, but you're really advocating for your local community, which again, we strongly believe that the local loan officer is so valuable to a first-time home buyer because that's
Yeah.
probably the best financial resource that they have for, unless they're very well heeled for a first-time home buyer.
Yeah, and I mean, I think loan officers are just so uniquely positioned between the consumer and the industry. And so that voice needs to be at the table and it needs to be their consumers, their market needs to see them showing up for them as that bridge. So yeah, I think it's really, really important.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you, we're getting close on time, but I want to ask you kind of a closed out question, but I'll leave you for any other thoughts. But in the report, you lay out several strategies, but you have three strategies: closing the knowledge gap, raising the standard of care, and rebuilding trust. Obviously, all three of those are important. But if a loan officers today said, "Where would I start?" What's the most important? What's your opinion on that?
Oh gosh, I guess I gotta go to trust. It's
Yeah.
that's what I mean, I do all of my, workshops and keynotes focus on that because I think it's especially in a world with AI where people have access to information. It's just again, you're not the holder of the information, although you have extra, strategy and experience, but it's about leaning into empathy and what makes you human and how you connect with others. So I think that that's how you stand out and you have a competitive edge is by showing up in your community, partnering with other leaders and really building empathy. To your point on that Ryan Grant webinar that I loved, starting with the empathy question, like what are your goals? What keeps you up at night? That type of thing is what is going to build trust in the one-on-one. And of course, all the other things we've talked about, building trust in your community. But that's where you're going to then build the connection that's going to create, referrals, conversions, and I think have a lasting impact.
100% agree. Yeah, that's just so important, building trust and empathy. We when anything you do day to day, like in your job, you kind of lose some of the emotional aspect of it. And this, we still got to realize, even this first time home buyer, like this is the biggest decision that they've ever made.
Yeah, exactly. It's so easy to kind of go numb to that sometimes because it's just that's the job. But yeah, for every person that comes to you, almost every person, they have their own relationship to money and home ownership that is really heavy and has its own story around it. And so I think it's important to always lean into what does that relationship look like?
Absolutely. Okay, so last thing. Um, Again, we really love First Home IQ. If someone just wants to get started with First Home IQ, they're a loan officer here listening to it or a lender, where's the best place to go?
I think, I mean, go to our website, firsthomeiq.com, but we do have a weekly workshop now every Monday at 10 a.m. Pacific. And we walk through our resources. We talk through what you're really like, what your job looks like and what might be helpful to you. So those workshops would be beneficial. And if you go to firsthomeiq.com/workshop, you can register for one or reach out for another time that works better for you.
Yeah, I mean, I love those. I've been on the last couple of them, so it's been great. I definitely encourage
Nice.
everybody to check those out. Well, Kristen, thank you so much for coming on. Always a pleasure, and I'm sure we'll be doing this again sometime soon after your next report.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.